When Clara's lips touched his in that crowded bar, she had no idea she'd just kissed the man who owned the entire building and half the city. The shock in his dark eyes would haunt her dreams for weeks to come. Drop your city in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. Let's dive into the story. But let me tell you how we got to that life-changing moment. The music thumped through Clara Williams' chest as she adjusted her black dress for the third time in 10 minutes. The Mirror's Edge was packed for a Friday night, bodies pressed together under dim lighting that made everyone look mysterious and beautiful. At 25, Clara should have felt confident in places like this, but tonight she felt restless, disconnected. "You're doing it again," her best friend Jessica shouted over the music, sliding up beside her at the high-top table they'd claimed near the bar's edge. "Doing what?" Clara asked, though she already knew. "That thing where you disappear into your own head." Jessica's red curls bounced as she shook her head dramatically. "We came here to celebrate your promotion, remember? Senior Marketing Coordinator at Henderson & Associates. That's huge." Clara smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. I know, it's just—" She gestured vaguely at the crowd. "All these people seem so sure of themselves." Jessica followed her gaze, then suddenly grabbed Clara's arm. "Speaking of sure of themselves, check out Mr. Serious over there." Clara's eyes found him immediately, even though Jessica hadn't pointed. He sat alone at the far end of the bar, a figure that seemed to exist in his own sphere despite the chaos around him. Tall, with dark hair perfectly styled, he wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Clara's monthly salary. His fingers wrapped around a glass of what looked like aged whiskey, and his dark eyes surveyed the room with the calm assessment of a man who missed nothing. "He's been there for an hour," Jessica continued, her voice taking on that mischievous tone Clara knew meant trouble. "Haven't seen him speak to a single person. Just sits there looking like he owns the place." "Maybe he's waiting for someone," Clara suggested, though something about his stillness suggested he wasn't waiting for anyone. "Or maybe he needs someone to shake up his evening." Jessica's grin turned wicked. "I dare you." Clara's stomach dropped. "Dare me what? To go kiss him?" "Jessica, no." Clara's voice came out strangled. "I can't just walk up to a complete stranger and—" "Why not? You just got promoted, you're successful, beautiful, single. When's the last time you did something spontaneous?" Clara stared at the man across the bar. Even from this distance, there was something magnetic about him, something that made her pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with the crowded room. "He looks dangerous." "Dangerously handsome," Jessica corrected. "Come on, Clara, live a little. What's the worst that could happen?" Clara could think of about 50 terrible outcomes, but something in the man's solitary presence called to her. Maybe it was the way he held himself apart from everyone else, like she often felt. Maybe it was the liquid courage from her second cosmopolitan. Or maybe it was the desperate need to prove to herself that she could be the kind of woman who took chances. "Fine," she heard herself say, "but if this goes badly, you're paying for therapy." Jessica's squeal of delight was lost in the music as Clara smoothed her dress one final time. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she began the longest walk of her life across that crowded bar floor. Every step toward the mysterious stranger felt like walking through quicksand. Clara's confidence wavered with each click of her heels against the polished floor, but Jessica's expectant gaze burned into her back, making retreat impossible. The man hadn't noticed her approach yet, his attention focused on something beyond the crowd that Clara couldn't see. Up close, he was even more striking than she'd realized. Strong jaw, sharp cheekbones, and an intensity that made the air around him seem charged. His suit was definitely custom-tailored, fitting his broad shoulders perfectly. Clara hesitated 3 feet away, suddenly aware of how insane this plan was. What kind of woman walked up to a stranger and kissed them? But then he turned slightly, and she caught a glimpse of his profile. Noble, severe, beautiful in a way that made her breath catch. Before she could lose her nerve completely, Clara closed the distance between them. "Excuse me," she said, her voice barely audible over the music. He turned fully then, and Clara found herself looking into the darkest brown eyes she'd ever seen. They swept over her face with an intensity that made her feel exposed, as if he could read every thought she'd ever had. "Yes?" His voice was deep, smooth like aged whiskey, with just a hint of an accent she couldn't place. This was it, the moment of no return. "I hope you'll forgive me for this," Clara whispered, and before he could respond she rose up on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was meant to be quick, a dare fulfilled and nothing more. But the moment their lips touched, Something electric shot through Clara's entire body. His lips were warm, firm, and after a heartbeat of surprise, he responded with a gentleness that completely undid her. Time seemed suspended. The noise of the bar faded away. The crowd disappeared, and there was only this: the taste of whiskey on his lips, the subtle scent of expensive cologne, the way his hand came up to cup her face with surprising tenderness. When they broke apart, Clara's eyes flew open to find him staring at her with an expression she couldn't read. Shock, yes, but something deeper, something that made her knees feel unsteady. "I'm sorry," she breathed, suddenly mortified by her boldness. "My friend dared me, and I just—" She gestured helplessly toward where Jessica waited, but her eyes never left his face. "Your friend dares you to kiss strangers often?" There was amusement in his voice now, rich and warm. "Never. This is completely out of character for me." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I should go." But when she turned to leave, his voice stopped her. "Wait." He stood from his bar stool, and Clara realized just how tall he really was. "I'm Pedro Castellano. Clara Williams." She accepted his extended hand, noting the strength in his grip, the expensive watch on his wrist. "Tell me, Clara Williams, do you make a habit of running away after kissing men?" "I don't make a habit of kissing strangers at all," she replied, surprised by her own honesty. Pedro's smile was slow, transforming his serious face completely. "Then I'm honored to be your first." The way he said it made Clara's pulse race. "I really should get back to my friend. Have a drink with me instead." Clara glanced toward Jessica, who was making encouraging gestures from across the bar. "I've already had 2 cosmopolitans tonight." "Then something else." "Water, coffee, whatever you'd like." Pedro signaled the bartender with a subtle gesture that was immediately noticed and acted upon. "Unless you're afraid." "Afraid of what?" His dark eyes held hers steadily. "Of finding out what happens after the dare ends." Clara knew she should walk away. Everything about this man screamed danger. Not physical danger, but the kind that could turn her orderly life upside down. But the challenge in his voice, the way he looked at her like she was the only person in the room, made walking away impossible. "1 drink," she agreed, sliding onto the bar stool beside him. What Clara didn't know was that Pedro Castellano hadn't been surprised by her kiss. He'd been watching her for 20 minutes, intrigued by the woman who seemed so out of place among the crowd of pretentious socialites and business climbers who usually populated his establishments. 2 waters, Pedro told the bartender, who appeared instantly despite the crowd of people trying to get his attention. Clara noticed the immediate deference, the way the man nodded and moved as if Pedro's request took priority over everyone else's. "You don't have to stop drinking because of me," Clara said, settling onto the bar stool. "I just meant I shouldn't have any more alcohol." "Wise policy when making impulsive decisions," Pedro replied, and Clara detected that same hint of amusement in his voice. "Though I have to say, your execution was flawless. You're never going to let me live down the fact that I kissed you out of nowhere, are you?" "Not likely." He turned to face her fully, and Clara was struck again by how intense his attention felt. "It's not every day someone surprises me." The bartender set 2 glasses of ice water in front of them, with a speed that suggested Pedro was someone important here. Clara took a sip, grateful for something to do with her hands. "You come here often?" she asked, immediately cringing at the cliché. "You could say that." Pedro's response was carefully neutral. "What about you?" "First time. Jessica, my friend, insisted we needed to celebrate somewhere sophisticated." Clara made air quotes around the word. "I usually prefer quieter places." "And yet you were bold enough to kiss a stranger in a crowded bar." "Temporary insanity," Clara said quickly, "brought on by a promotion and cosmopolitans." "Congratulations on the promotion. What kind of work do you do?" "Marketing, nothing too exciting. Mostly corporate campaigns and brand development." Clara found herself relaxing despite the intensity of Pedro's gaze. "What about you?" "Business," he said vaguely. "Various investments and ventures." There was something evasive about his answer, but before Clara could probe further, a man in an expensive suit approached their end of the bar. He leaned close to Pedro, whispering something in his ear that made Pedro's expression grow serious. "Excuse me 1 moment," Pedro said to Clara, then stepped away for what appeared to be a tense, quiet conversation. Clara used the opportunity to really observe him, the way he carried himself, the quality of his clothing, the immediate attention he commanded. Everything suggested wealth and power. But there was something else, something in the set of his shoulders, and the way his eyes constantly scanned the room that spoke of a man always alert to potential threats. When he returned, his expression had shifted back to its previous warmth, but Clara sensed the change wasn't entirely genuine. "Sorry about that. Business never sleeps. Must be some business to require attention at 11 on a Friday night." Pedro's smile was enigmatic. The most successful ventures often are. Clara was trying to decide how to respond when Jessica appeared at her elbow, slightly breathless from pushing through the crowd. "Clara, I hate to interrupt, but I just got a text from Mike. His flight got in early from Denver, and he's picking me up in 10 minutes. Clara's heart sank. Mike was Jessica's boyfriend of 2 years, and his business trips always meant Jessica disappeared the moment he returned. "Go," Clara said, standing to hug her friend. "Tell Mike I said welcome back." "But what about—" Jessica glanced meaningfully at Pedro, who had also stood when she approached. "I'll be fine. I'll catch a cab home." "Actually," Pedro interjected smoothly, "I'd be happy to ensure Clara gets home safely." Jessica's eyes widened slightly at the offer, clearly torn between excitement about her friend's romantic prospect and concern about leaving her with a stranger. "You don't have to do that," Clara said quickly. "I'm perfectly capable of—" "I insist," Pedro said, his tone allowing no argument. "It would be my pleasure." After Jessica left with promises to call the next morning for details, Clara found herself alone with Pedro in the suddenly overwhelming crowd. The bar seemed to pulse with energy around them, but their small space felt insulated, private. "You really don't need to drive me home," Clara said. "I live across town, and it's completely out of your way." Pedro's smile was patient. "How do you know where I live? I just assumed—" "I know this might sound presumptuous," he interrupted gently, "but I'm not ready for this evening to end. Would you like to go somewhere quieter, where we can actually hear each other speak?" Every rational part of Clara's brain screamed warnings. She'd known this man for all of 30 minutes. She had no idea who he really was or what somewhere quieter meant, but the way he was looking at her, as if she were the most interesting person he'd encountered in years, made rational thought difficult. "Where did you have in mind?" "There's a cafe about 6 blocks from here that stays open late. Best coffee in the city, and quiet enough for conversation." Clara hesitated, and Pedro seemed to sense her uncertainty. "Or I can simply call you a cab, and we can part ways here," he said. "No pressure, no expectations. Your choice entirely." The fact that he gave her an easy out somehow made Clara want to stay more. The cafe sounds nice. What she didn't know was that Pedro owned the cafe, just like he owned the bar, just like he owned half the neighborhood. But some revelations were better saved for later, when she was ready to learn exactly who Pedro Castellano really was. The cafe was everything Pedro had promised: intimate, softly lit, and blissfully quiet after the chaos of the bar. Moondance sat tucked between a vintage bookstore and an art gallery, its windows glowing warmly against the night. Only a handful of tables were occupied, mostly by couples engaged in quiet conversation, or individuals bent over laptops with steaming mugs. Pedro guided Clara to a corner table with practiced ease, and once again she noticed how quickly they were attended to. The barista, a woman in her 30s with paint-stained fingers, approached their table with a familiarity that suggested she knew Pedro well. "The usual, Mr. Castellano?" she asked with a warm smile. "Please, Maria, and for the lady—" Pedro looked to Clara expectantly. "Surprise me," Clara said, curious to see what Pedro would choose for her. "Something sweet but not overwhelming," Pedro told Maria. "Perhaps the lavender honey latte?" Maria nodded and disappeared behind the counter, leaving Clara studying Pedro with new interest. "Mr. Castellano?" she repeated. "They know you pretty well here. I come here often. Late nights, early mornings. Coffee is essential for my schedule." Clara accepted this explanation, though she was beginning to notice a pattern in how people responded to Pedro. It wasn't just recognition, it was deference, the kind usually reserved for someone with significant influence. "Tell me about this promotion of yours," Pedro said, settling back in his chair. "What kind of marketing do you do?" Clara found herself relaxing into the conversation, telling him about her work at Henderson & Associates, her recent campaign for a sustainable clothing brand, her hopes of eventually starting her own agency. Pedro listened with an attention that was both flattering and slightly unnerving, as if every word mattered to him. "You want to build something of your own," he observed when she finished. "Independence is important to you." "Very important." I've watched too many people become dependent on others for their security, their happiness, their sense of self-worth. Clara paused, surprised by her own honesty. I suppose that sounds cynical. It sounds wise. Pedro's expression grew thoughtful. Though sometimes the right partnership can make you stronger, not weaker. And sometimes it can destroy everything you've worked for. There was something in Clara's voice that made Pedro lean forward slightly. Personal experience. Clara hesitated, then decided she had nothing to lose with honesty. My parents. My mother gave up her career, her dreams, everything to support my father's ambitions. When he left her for his secretary 3 years ago, she had nothing. No career, no savings of her own, no identity outside of being his wife. I'm sorry, Pedro said, and his sympathy sounded genuine. That must have been difficult to watch. It taught me never to put myself in that position, to always maintain my independence, no matter what. Pedro nodded slowly. A hard-learned lesson, but a valuable one. Maria appeared with their drinks, a rich espresso for Pedro and a beautifully prepared lavender latte for Clara that smelled like heaven. This is perfect, Clara said after her first sip. How did you know I'd like lavender? Lucky guess. You seem like someone who appreciates subtle complexities. Clara felt warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the coffee. What about you? What drives Pedro Castellano at 11:30 on a Friday night? For a moment, Pedro's expression grew distant, almost guarded. Building something lasting, he said finally. Creating security that can't be taken away. Security for yourself? For the people I care about. His dark eyes met hers across the small table. Family is everything to me, Clara. Protecting the people in my circle, ensuring their safety and prosperity. It's not just important, it's sacred. There was something in the way he said it that made Clara's pulse quicken. Not fear exactly, but an awareness that she was seeing beneath Pedro's polished surface to something deeper, more intense than she'd expected. That's a lot of responsibility, she said carefully. The best things in life usually are. They talked for another hour, the conversation flowing between light topics and surprisingly personal revelations. Clara found herself sharing stories about her childhood, her dreams, her fears in a way that felt natural, despite how recently they'd met. Pedro listened with that same intense attention, asking thoughtful questions that showed he was truly hearing her. But Clara also noticed what he didn't share. His answers about his family were vague, his business references carefully neutral. He deflected personal questions with skill that spoke of long practice. I should probably head home, Clara said reluctantly when she noticed the cafe was nearly empty. It's getting late, and I have an early day tomorrow. Of course, Pedro signaled Maria, who appeared instantly with their check. But when Clara reached for her purse, Pedro waved her away. My invitation, my treat. Thank you for tonight, Clara said as they stood to leave. This was unexpected but really lovely. Pedro helped her with her coat, his hands lingering briefly on her shoulders. The pleasure was entirely mine. May I drive you home? Clara hesitated. Accepting a ride would mean showing him where she lived, crossing another line in an evening full of boundary crossing. But something about Pedro made her feel safe, despite all the questions surrounding him. All right, she agreed. What Clara didn't know as they walked to Pedro's sleek black Mercedes was that he already knew exactly where she lived, had known since the moment she'd told him her name. Because Pedro Castellano made it his business to know everything about people who caught his interest, and Clara Williams had caught his interest in a way that surprised even him. Pedro's Mercedes glided through the quiet city streets with the smooth precision of expensive engineering. Clara found herself stealing glances at his profile as he navigated traffic with confident ease, noting the way streetlights cast shadows across his strong features. This is a beautiful car, she said, running her fingers along the leather seat. A weakness of mine, Pedro admitted. I appreciate things that are well crafted, built to last. Like your suit and your watch. Clara gestured toward the timepiece glinting on his wrist. So you have expensive taste. I've learned that quality is worth the investment in all things. Something in his tone made Clara look at him more carefully, but his expression remained neutral as he turned onto her street. Third building on the right, Clara directed, pointing toward her modest apartment complex. It was clean and safe, but clearly a world away from Pedro's realm of luxury cars and designer clothing. Pedro pulled to the curb and turned off the engine, making no move to leave. Thank you for tonight, Clara said, suddenly feeling awkward. I know it started strangely, but I'm glad Jessica dared me to kiss you. Pedro's smile was slow and genuine. So am I. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, neither seeming eager to end the evening. Clara, Pedro said finally, his voice serious, I'd like to see you again. I'd like that too, she replied, surprised by how much she meant it. Tomorrow night. Dinner? Clara hesitated. Something was happening between them, something intense and potentially overwhelming. She'd known Pedro for just a few hours, but already he seemed to be occupying more space in her thoughts than any man had in years. Too soon? Pedro asked, sensing her uncertainty. Maybe a little, Clara admitted. It's just, you're not exactly what I expected when I walked up to you tonight. What did you expect? A simple dare, a quick kiss, maybe a laugh, then back to normal life. Clara looked out the window at her ordinary apartment building. You're not normal life, Pedro Castellano. No, he agreed quietly. I'm not. There was something almost warning in his tone, but when Clara looked at him, his expression was carefully neutral. What if we start slower, she suggested. Coffee tomorrow afternoon instead of dinner? Coffee sounds perfect. Pedro walked her to the entrance of her building, waiting until she was safely inside before returning to his car. Clara watched from her window as the Mercedes pulled away, its taillights disappearing into the night. What she didn't see was Pedro pulling over 3 blocks away to make a phone call. Marcus, it's me, he said, when his security chief answered. I need a background check on Clara Williams, 25, works at Henderson & Associates Marketing, lives at 2847 Maple Street, apartment 4B. Problems, boss? Pedro thought of Clara's honest eyes, her nervous laugh, the way she'd blushed when she admitted to kissing him on a dare. No problems, just due diligence. You want the full workup? Everything. But Marcus? Pedro's voice grew serious. Keep it discreet, and keep it between us. Understood. Pedro ended the call and sat in the darkness for several minutes, thinking about the evening that had just passed. In his world, nothing happened by chance. People didn't approach him without agenda, didn't kiss him on random dares, didn't share personal stories with the kind of genuine openness Clara had shown, which meant either Clara Williams was an exceptional actress with hidden motives, or she was exactly what she appeared to be, an ordinary woman who had no idea who she'd just kissed. For her sake, Pedro hoped it was the latter, because the moment someone targeted him through an innocent woman, that woman's safety became his responsibility, and Pedro Castellano protected what was his, no matter the cost. Meanwhile, in her small apartment, Clara stood at her bathroom mirror, trying to process the evening that had changed everything. Her lips still tingled from that unexpected kiss. Her mind still reeled from the intensity of Pedro's attention. She'd lived 25 careful years, building a stable life, avoiding unnecessary risks. And now, in one impulsive moment, she'd kissed a stranger and found herself completely captivated. Clara touched her lips, remembering the warmth of Pedro's mouth, the gentle way he'd cupped her face, the promise in his dark eyes when he'd asked to see her again. Tomorrow couldn't come fast enough. What neither of them knew was that across town, in the security office of the Mirror's Edge, footage from that evening was being carefully reviewed. The kiss, the conversation, Pedro's protective gesture as he escorted Clara to his car, all of it captured in crystal-clear digital quality, and sent within minutes to someone very interested in Pedro Castellano's personal life. Someone who understood that the fastest way to hurt a powerful man wasn't to attack him directly. It was to threaten what he cared about. Clara arrived at Moondance Cafe 15 minutes early, her nerves getting the better of her punctuality. She'd changed outfits 3 times before settling on a simple blue dress that made her eyes look brighter, and she'd caught herself checking her reflection in every store window during the walk over. Pedro was already there, seated at the same corner table they'd shared the night before. He stood when he saw her, that devastating smile transforming his serious features, and Clara felt her heart do something acrobatic in her chest. "You look beautiful," he said, helping her into her chair with the same old-world courtesy he'd shown before. "Thank you. You clean up pretty well yourself." Pedro wore dark slacks and a white button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing strong forearms that made Clara's mouth go dry. Even dressed casually, he radiated that same quiet power that had intrigued her from across the bar. Maria appeared almost instantly, with Pedro's usual espresso and the lavender latte Clara had enjoyed the night before. "You remembered," Clara said, touched by the thoughtful gesture. "I remember everything about last night." The intensity in his voice made Clara's cheeks warm. "Everything? Every word you said, every expression that crossed your face, the way you bit your lip when you were thinking." His dark eyes held hers steadily. "Especially the way you felt when I kissed you back." Clara's breath caught. "Pedro, too honest?" "No, just—" She took a steadying sip of her latte. "I'm not used to men being so direct. Would you prefer I pretend I'm not attracted to you? That I didn't spend most of last night thinking about kissing you again?" "Did you really?" "Every hour until dawn." The confession hung between them, charged with promise. Clara felt herself leaning forward, drawn by the magnetic pull that seemed to exist whenever Pedro was near. "I thought about you too," she admitted softly. Pedro's smile was triumphant and tender at the same time. "Good." They talked for an hour, the conversation flowing as easily as it had the night before. Pedro asked about her work, her family, her dreams with genuine interest. Clara found herself sharing stories she rarely told anyone, drawn out by his attentive presence. But she also noticed things that puzzled her. The way other cafe patrons glanced at their table with curious interest. The subtle way Pedro positioned himself to keep the entrance in his line of sight. The expensive watch that probably cost more than her annual salary. "Pedro," she said during a lull in conversation, "can I ask you something? Anything. What kind of business are you really in?" Pedro's expression didn't change, but Clara sensed a subtle shift in his energy. "What makes you think I haven't told you? Various investments and ventures doesn't really answer the question. Plus, people treat you differently. The bartender last night, Maria here, they respond to you like you're someone important. Maybe I tip well." Clara raised an eyebrow. "That's not the same thing, and you know it." Pedro was quiet for a long moment, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "I own several businesses around the city. Restaurants, clubs, real estate. People recognize me from that, including the Mirror's Edge." "Yes." Clara blinked in surprise. "You own the bar where we met. Why didn't you tell me? Would it have changed anything?" "I don't know. Maybe. It explains why everyone jumped to attention when you wanted something." Pedro leaned forward, his expression serious. "Clara, I need you to understand something about me. My life is more complicated than most people's. The businesses I run, the responsibilities I have, they require a certain level of privacy, discretion." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that if we continue seeing each other, there will be things about my world that might seem overwhelming at first. I want to be honest with you, but I also want to protect you from aspects of my life that could be difficult." Clara studied his face, noting the careful choice of words, the hint of warning beneath his explanation. "Are you married?" "No." "Criminal?" Pedro's pause was barely perceptible, but Clara caught it. Not in any way that would hurt innocent people. It wasn't exactly a denial, and Clara felt a chill run down her spine. But when she looked into Pedro's dark eyes, she saw sincerity, even vulnerability. "I should probably run screaming, shouldn't I?" she said softly. "Probably, but I don't want to. Neither do I want you to." Pedro reached across the table, covering her hand with his. His touch was warm, reassuring, and electric all at once. "Clara, I can promise you this. You will always be safe with me. Whatever else happens, whatever you learn about my world, your safety is sacred to me." There was something fierce in the way he said it, something that should have frightened her. Instead, Clara felt protected in a way she'd never experienced before. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we take this one day at a time. No pressure, no demands, just two people getting to know each other." Clara squeezed his hand. "I'd like that." What she didn't know was that across the street, a man with a telephoto lens was documenting their intimate conversation, capturing every gesture, every touch. Photos that would be delivered within the hour to someone with very specific plans for Pedro Castellano and the woman who'd clearly captured his interest. 3 days later, Clara was beginning to understand what Pedro meant about his complicated life. She'd received flowers at her office Monday morning, not a simple bouquet, but an arrangement so exquisite that her entire department had gathered around her desk to admire it. The card was signed simply P, with a phone number she recognized as Pedro's. Tuesday brought a bottle of wine to her apartment, a vintage so rare that even Clara's wine-loving neighbor, Mrs. Chen, had gasped when she saw the label. And Wednesday evening, Pedro had called to invite her to dinner at a restaurant that required 3-week advance reservations. "I can't let you keep spending this kind of money on me," Clara protested during their phone conversation. The flowers alone probably cost more than I spend on groceries in a month. Pedro's laugh was warm through the phone. Let me worry about the money, Clara. I want to do these things for you. But it makes me uncomfortable. I'm not used to... She searched for the right words. I'm not used to being treated like someone precious. There was a pause before Pedro spoke again, his voice softer. Then it's time you learned what it feels like. Clara's heart did that fluttering thing it seemed to do whenever Pedro said something unexpectedly tender. Dinner sounds wonderful, she conceded. But somewhere normal, okay? Somewhere I don't need to worry about which fork to use. Deal. I know a place you'll love. The restaurant Pedro chose was indeed perfect. Intimate without being ostentatious, elegant without being intimidating. Clara felt comfortable in her simple black dress, especially when she saw the appreciation in Pedro's eyes as he stood to greet her. You're going to spoil me, she said as the hostess led them to a private table near the window. That's the plan. Over dinner, Clara learned more about Pedro's world. He owned 14 businesses throughout the city, had grown up in a tight-knit family, and carried responsibilities that sometimes kept him awake at night. Tell me about your family, Clara said over dessert. Are you close? Pedro's expression grew guarded. Very close. Family loyalty is everything in my world. Your world, Clara repeated. You keep saying that, like you live in a completely different reality from everyone else. In many ways I do. Because you're wealthy? Wealth is just one aspect. Pedro set down his wineglass, studying Clara's face carefully. Clara, there are things about my life, my family's history, that most people wouldn't understand. Try me. Pedro was quiet for so long that Clara wondered if he'd decided not to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, measured. My grandfather came to this country with nothing but determination and a fierce desire to protect his family. He built something from nothing, created opportunities where none existed. But the methods available to immigrants in his generation weren't always conventional. Clara felt her pulse quicken. What kind of methods? The kind that required absolute loyalty, complete discretion, and unwavering commitment to family honor. Clara was beginning to understand, pieces clicking together like a puzzle she hadn't realized she was solving. Pedro's careful privacy, the deference he commanded, the expensive lifestyle, the hint of danger that seemed to surround him. Pedro, she said quietly, are you trying to tell me your family is connected to organized crime? Pedro's dark eyes met hers steadily. I'm telling you that my family operates by codes and traditions that most people don't understand, that we have enemies who would use anyone close to us to cause harm, and that anyone who becomes important to me becomes a potential target. Clara's coffee cup clattered against the saucer as she set it down with shaking hands. Oh God! Clara, look at me! Pedro's voice was gentle but commanding. Look at me. She raised her eyes to his face, seeing sincerity and something that looked like pain. I should have walked away after that first night, he continued. Should have let you go home and never contacted you again. It would have been safer for you. But you didn't. No, because for the first time in my life I met someone who made me want to be selfish. Clara's mind raced, trying to process what Pedro was telling her. So when you said you protect people you care about, I meant it literally. My security team. My precautions, the way I live, it's all designed to keep the people I love safe from the people who would hurt them to get to me. And if I keep seeing you, I become one of those people you have to protect. Yes. Clara stared across the table at this man, who had somehow become so important to her in just 4 days. Everything about him suddenly made sense. The expensive clothes, the careful privacy, the way people responded to him with a mixture of respect and wariness. I should be terrified, she said finally. You should be. Any rational person would walk away right now. And yet I'm not. Walking away, I mean. Pedro's expression grew intense. Clara, I'm not walking away, Pedro. Whatever this is between us, whatever your world involves, I'm not ready to give up on it. The relief that crossed Pedro's face was so evident that Clara realized how much her answer had meant to him. You might change your mind when you learn more, he warned. Then let me learn more. Let me decide for myself what I can handle. Pedro reached across the table, taking her hand in both of his. There's no going back once you know everything. I know. What Clara didn't know was that at that very moment, someone was making final preparations to test exactly how far Pedro Castellano would go to protect the woman who'd captured his heart. The following Friday evening, Clara was working late at the office trying to finish a campaign proposal that had been giving her trouble all week. The building was nearly empty, just her and the night security guard downstairs. She was so absorbed in her work that she almost missed the soft knock on her office door. "Come in," she called, assuming it was the security guard making his rounds. Instead, a woman she'd never seen before stepped into her office. Tall, elegant, with platinum blonde hair and clothes that screamed expensive. She moved with the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. "Clara Williams?" "Yes, can I help you?" The woman smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I think we need to have a conversation about Pedro Castellano." Clara's blood went cold. "I'm sorry, who are you?" "Someone who knows exactly who Pedro really is, and what he's capable of." The woman closed the office door behind her and settled into the chair across from Clara's desk, without being invited. "You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into, do you?" "I think you should leave," Clara said, reaching for her phone. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." The woman's voice remained pleasant, conversational. "Not until you hear what I have to say." Clara's finger hovered over Pedro's number. Something in the woman's tone made her hesitate. "My name is Victoria Rossi," the woman continued, "and Pedro Castellano destroyed my family." "That's impossible. Pedro would never what? Hurt innocent people?" Victoria's laugh was sharp, bitter. "Oh, my dear girl, you really don't know anything. Do you?" Victoria opened her purse and pulled out a manila folder, spreading photographs across Clara's desk. 3 years ago, Pedro decided my father's territory was interfering with his expansion plans, so he orchestrated a war that left my father dead and my brother in prison. Clara stared at the photographs, newspaper clippings, crime scene photos, court documents. Her stomach churned as she saw Pedro's name mentioned repeatedly. "This could be fake," Clara said weakly. "Anyone can doctor photos." "Could be, but it's not." Victoria leaned forward. "Ask him, Clara. Ask him about the Rossi family. Ask him about the warehouse fire on 5th Street. Ask him about my 17-year-old cousin who was in the wrong place at the wrong time." Clara's hands were shaking now. "What do you want?" "I want justice, and you're going to help me get it." "I won't help you hurt Pedro." Victoria's smile turned predatory. "You don't have a choice, because if you don't do exactly what I tell you, everyone you care about will suffer the consequences." Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. "What are you talking about?" Victoria pulled out her phone, showing Clara a series of photographs. Clara's apartment building, her parents' house in Connecticut, her office building. All taken recently, all clearly surveillance photos. "Your mother walks the same route to her book club every Tuesday," Victoria said conversationally. "Your father leaves for his morning jog at exactly 6:30 a.m. You grab coffee at the same cafe every Saturday morning. You're threatening my family. I'm explaining reality. Pedro isn't the only one with resources, Clara. The difference is he's constrained by his feelings for you. I'm not." Clara felt tears of fear and rage burning behind her eyes. "What do you want me to do?" "Simple. You're going to wear a wire to your next meeting with Pedro. You're going to get him to talk about his business operations, his illegal activities, his associates, and you're going to give me enough evidence to destroy him. He'll never talk about those things with me. He's too careful. He will if you know how to ask. Men in love are surprisingly careless about what they reveal to the women they trust." Victoria stood, smoothing her skirt. "You have 48 hours to think about it. Then you'll call the number on this card and we'll arrange the details." She placed a business card on Clara's desk and headed for the door. "And Clara, don't even think about warning Pedro. I have people watching both of you. One word to him about our conversation, and your parents will discover just how dangerous Pedro's enemies can be." After Victoria left, Clara sat alone in her office, staring at the photographs spread across her desk. Her hands shook as she picked up the newspaper clipping with Pedro's name highlighted in yellow. Everything she thought she knew about the man she was falling in love with crumbled around her. The careful way he'd revealed his complicated life suddenly seemed sinister rather than protective. Had he been lying to her from the beginning? Clara's phone buzzed with a text from Pedro. "Thinking about you. Hope your presentation went well. Can't wait to see you tomorrow." She stared at the message, wondering if she was looking at words from the man she was falling for, or from someone capable of the violence Victoria had described. For the first time since meeting Pedro Castellano, Clara was truly afraid, but not just of him, of what she might have to do to protect the people she loved. Clara barely slept that night. Victoria's threats and accusations spinning through her mind in an endless loop. By morning, she'd made a decision that terrified her, but seemed like the only option. She was going to confront Pedro directly. Pedro had texted her early, suggesting they meet for lunch at a small bistro near her office. Clara agreed, knowing it might be the last peaceful meal they ever shared. He was already waiting when she arrived, his face lighting up with that devastating smile that had become so familiar. Today, though, Clara saw it differently, wondering if that charm was a weapon he'd perfected over years of dangerous business dealings. "You look tired," Pedro said, standing to greet her with a kiss on the cheek. "Everything all right?" "Actually, no." Clara sat down without accepting his gesture, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "We need to talk." Pedro's expression grew serious as he settled back into his seat. "What's wrong?" Clara pulled out her phone and showed him the business card Victoria had left. "Someone came to see me last night. Victoria Rossi." The change in Pedro was instant and dramatic. His entire body went rigid, his eyes growing cold in a way Clara had never seen before. For a moment she glimpsed something dangerous beneath his polished exterior. What did she want? His voice was carefully controlled, but Clara heard the steel beneath it. "She wanted to tell me about the Rossi family, about what you did to them." Pedro was silent for a long moment, his hands resting flat on the table. When he spoke, his voice was quietly serious. "What exactly did she tell you? That you destroyed her family? That you had her father killed and her brother imprisoned? That you're responsible for the death of her 17-year-old cousin?" Pedro closed his eyes briefly, as if in pain. "Clara, is it true? It's more complicated than she made it sound." "That's not an answer, Pedro. Did you have her father killed?" Pedro looked directly at her, his dark eyes holding no deception. "Roberto Rossi was killed in a territorial dispute that he initiated. I didn't order his death, but I didn't prevent it either when he chose to escalate the conflict." Clara felt sick. "And her brother?" "Vincent Rossi was arrested for drug trafficking and attempted murder. I provided evidence of his crimes to federal authorities." "Her cousin?" Pedro's jaw tightened. "Carlo Rossi was 17 and in a place he shouldn't have been, doing things he shouldn't have been doing. His death was an accident during an operation that was supposed to be clean, surgical. It's something I'll regret for the rest of my life." Clara stared at him, trying to reconcile the man she'd fallen for with the one who spoke so calmly about violence and death. "Why?" she whispered. "Why did any of this happen?" "Because Roberto Rossi decided to move drugs through schools and playgrounds in my neighborhood. Because he was using teenagers as runners and dealers. Because when I asked him to stop, he responded by sending those same children to attack my businesses." Pedro leaned forward, his intensity burning. "I protect what's mine, Clara. My family, my territory, the people in my care. When someone threatens that, I respond. By destroying entire families. By doing what's necessary to protect innocent people from predators." Pedro's voice grew harder. "Roberto Rossi was a cancer. His organization sold drugs to children, forced girls into prostitution, terrorized honest business owners. I gave him multiple opportunities to change his methods or relocate his operations. And when he refused, I removed the threat." Clara felt tears burning behind her eyes. "Do you hear yourself? You talk about murder like it's a business decision. In my world, sometimes it is." The stark honesty was almost worse than if he'd lied to her. Clara could see that Pedro felt no guilt about his actions, only regret about the collateral damage. "Victoria threatened my family," Clara said quietly. "She wants me to spy on you, to get evidence of your illegal activities. She says if I don't help her, she'll hurt my parents." Pedro's expression went absolutely lethal. "She what?" "She has surveillance photos of my apartment, my parents' house. She knows their routines, their schedules." Pedro was already reaching for his phone. "Marcus, it's me. I need immediate protection details on Clara's family. Full surveillance, maximum security, yes now." He ended the call and looked at Clara with an intensity that made her shiver. "Your family will be safe within the hour. Victoria Rossi won't get within 100 yards of anyone you care about. And then what? She just disappears like her father did?" Pedro's pause was telling. "Clara, there are some problems that can only be solved one way. You're going to kill her. I'm going to protect you." Clara stood abruptly, knocking over her water glass. "I can't do this, Pedro. I can't be with someone who solves problems by eliminating people." Pedro stood as well, reaching for her hand. "Clara, please, no." She pulled away from his touch. "I know you think you're protecting people, but what you're describing isn't protection. It's revenge. It's violence, begetting violence in an endless cycle. And what would you have me do? Let Victoria hurt your family to make a point. Allow her to threaten innocent people because you disapprove of my methods. Clara looked at this man she'd fallen in love with, seeing clearly for the first time exactly who he was. Not a businessman with a complicated life, but someone who lived in a world where human life was expendable when it threatened his interests. I would have you find another way, she said softly. Any other way. Pedro's expression grew pained. Clara, my methods may seem harsh, but they keep the people I love alive. In my world, hesitation gets innocents killed. And in my world, murder is wrong regardless of the justification. They stared at each other across the restaurant table, the distance between them suddenly feeling insurmountable. So what happens now? Pedro asked quietly. Clara picked up her purse, her heart breaking with every word she was about to speak. Now, I go handle Victoria Rossi my way, and you forget you ever knew me. Clara, you don't understand what you're walking into, and you don't understand that some of us choose not to respond to threats with violence. Clara turned to leave, but Pedro's voice stopped her. If you change your mind, if you need me for any reason, call day or night. Whatever has happened between us, I will always protect you. Clara didn't turn around, afraid that if she looked at him, she'd lose her resolve. Goodbye, Pedro. As she walked away, Clara didn't see the devastation on Pedro's face, or the way his hands clenched into fists as he watched the woman he'd fallen in love with disappear from his life. What she also didn't know was that Victoria Rossi had never intended to honor any bargain. The moment Clara stepped outside that restaurant, she became a target in a game where the only rule was survival. Clara had been home for less than an hour when the knock came at her door. She looked through the peephole to see Victoria Rossi standing in the hallway, no longer elegant but predatory, her smile sharp as a blade. "Hello, Clara. May I come in? We have so much to discuss. I told you I needed 48 hours. Plans change." Victoria pushed past Clara into the apartment. "I heard you had lunch with Pedro today. How did he take the news?" Clara's blood ran cold. "You were watching us." "I watch everything, dear. It's how I stay alive in this business." Victoria surveyed Clara's modest apartment with obvious disdain. "So, did Pedro confess to his crimes? Express remorse for destroying my family?" He explained his side of things. "Ah, yes, the noble protector narrative. Let me guess. My father was a monster, my brother a criminal, my cousin collateral damage in Pedro's righteous war." Clara remained silent, but Victoria read her expression. "He's very good at making his violence seem justified, isn't he? That's what makes him so dangerous." Victoria moved closer. "But here's what Pedro didn't tell you. My father tried to make peace 3 times. Pedro refused every offer because he wanted our territory for himself. That's not what he said. Of course it isn't, because Pedro Castellano has never told the truth about anything in his life." Victoria opened her purse, pulling out a small device. "Since you've clearly chosen loyalty to your lover over common sense, we're moving to Plan B." "What is that?" "Insurance. You're going to call Pedro and tell him you've reconsidered, that you want to see him tonight. And when he arrives, he's going to find more than just a reconciliation waiting for him." Clara backed toward her kitchen, her heart pounding. "I won't help you hurt him. You will, or your parents die tonight. Not tomorrow, not next week. Tonight." Victoria's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and smiled. "Perfect timing. That was confirmation that my people are in position outside your parents' house. One word from me, and they'll never see another sunrise." Clara felt tears of helplessness streaming down her cheeks. "Please don't do this. Call him, now." With shaking hands, Clara picked up her phone. Pedro answered on the first ring. "Clara? What's wrong?" His immediate concern made her heart break all over again. "Pedro, I've been thinking about what you said, about protecting the people we love." "Clara, where are you?" "I'm at home. I was wondering if you could come over. I think we need to talk more." There was a pause. "Are you alone?" Clara glanced at Victoria, who was watching her with predatory intensity. "Yes." Another pause, longer this time. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. After Clara hung up, Victoria smiled with satisfaction. "Excellent performance. For a moment, I almost believed you wanted to reconcile. What happens when he gets here?" "Justice, finally. Pedro Castellano has destroyed too many families, killed too many innocents. Tonight, that ends." Victoria moved to the window, checking the street below. "My people are already in position. When Pedro arrives, he'll find himself surrounded by very motivated individuals who have personal scores to settle. You're going to kill him, eventually. But first, he's going to experience the same helplessness he's forced on so many others. He's going to watch someone he cares about suffer and know there's nothing he can do to stop it. Clara realized with growing horror that Victoria's plan included torturing Pedro through her. You're insane. I'm thorough. 15 minutes later, Clara heard the sound of expensive engines in the street below. Not one car, but several. Victoria frowned, moving back to the window. That's not right, she muttered. Then her face went white. No, that's impossible. Clara looked over Victoria's shoulder to see the street filled with black SUVs. Men in dark suits emerged from the vehicles with military precision, taking positions around the building. How did he know? Victoria snarled, spinning toward Clara. You warned him somehow. I didn't. The lights in Clara's apartment suddenly went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, bathing everything in an eerie red glow. Victoria Rossi. Pedro's voice came from somewhere in the darkness, calm and controlled. You have 30 seconds to release Clara and surrender yourself. How is he in here? Victoria demanded, pulling a gun from her purse. Because Pedro Castellano didn't survive this long by walking into obvious traps, Pedro's voice replied. 20 seconds. Victoria grabbed Clara's arm, pressing the gun to her temple. I have her, Pedro. Come out where I can see you or she dies. 10 seconds. I'm serious. I'll kill her. 5. The apartment door exploded inward. Men in tactical gear poured through the entrance, while others rappelled through the windows from the roof. In the chaos and confusion, Clara felt Victoria's grip loosen as the woman tried to track multiple threats at once. Pedro emerged from what Clara realized was her bedroom. He'd somehow entered through the fire escape, while his team created the distraction at the front. Hello, Victoria. Victoria swung her weapon toward Pedro, but she was too slow. Pedro moved with lethal precision, disarming her before she could fire. The gun clattered across the floor as Victoria found herself restrained by 2 of Pedro's men. You can't kill me, Victoria spat. I have people positioned all over the city. Your precious Clara's family. Your people were neutralized an hour ago, Pedro said calmly. The moment you threatened Clara, you signed your own death warrant. Pedro moved to Clara, his hands gentle as he checked her for injuries. Are you hurt? Clara shook her head, overwhelmed by relief and the sudden understanding that Pedro had known exactly what Victoria was planning. How did you know it was a trap? She asked. Pedro's smile was grim. Because you called me Pedro instead of using my name naturally, because you spoke like someone was listening, and because Victoria Rossi has used the same tactics before. He turned to Victoria, his expression growing cold. The difference between you and me, Victoria, is that I don't make the same mistakes twice. Your father underestimated me. Your brother underestimated me. And now you've done the same thing. So what now? Victoria demanded. You execute me like you did my family. Pedro studied her for a long moment. No, I think a lifetime in federal prison will be more appropriate. My contacts in the FBI are very interested in your organization's activities. 2 of Pedro's men escorted Victoria from the apartment as she screamed threats and curses. When they were gone, Pedro turned to Clara, his expression vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I'm sorry you were dragged into this world. Sorry you were threatened because of me. Sorry you had to see what my life really involves. Clara looked at this man who had just orchestrated a complex rescue operation, who commanded loyalty from dozens of highly trained people, who moved through violence and danger with the skill of someone born to it. Pedro, she said softly, when Victoria showed me those photos, told me those stories, I was horrified. Not because I didn't believe you were capable of violence, but because I realized I didn't care. Pedro's eyes widened slightly. I don't understand your world, Clara continued. I don't like the violence, the constant danger, the way you have to calculate every threat. But tonight, when Victoria held a gun to my head, I wasn't thinking about your methods. I was thinking that I wanted you to save me. Clara, I love you, she interrupted. I love you despite your world, maybe because of it, because you use that strength to protect people like me, because when it mattered most, you were there. Pedro crossed to her in 2 strides, cupping her face in his hands. I love you too, more than I thought possible, more than is safe for either of us. Then we'll make it safe, Clara said. Together. When Pedro kissed her, it was with the desperation of a man who'd almost lost everything that mattered. Clara kissed him back with equal fervor, finally understanding that love sometimes meant accepting the darkness along with the light. 6 months later, Clara moved into Pedro's mansion overlooking the lake. It came with a security system that would have impressed the Pentagon, a staff of people whose loyalty was absolute, and a man who loved her enough to change his world to accommodate hers. Pedro established a legitimate investment firm that allowed Clara to work on marketing campaigns for his legal businesses. He took fewer risks, delegated more dangerous operations to his lieutenants, and built a life where Clara could be safe while remaining true to herself. And if sometimes Clara woke at night to find Pedro's side of the bed empty, knowing he was handling business she preferred not to think about, she'd learned that love meant trusting the person you'd chosen to love. Because Pedro Castellano had kept his promise, she was always safe with him. In his arms, in his home, in his dangerous but devoted heart, Clara had found the love story she'd never dared to dream of. Even if it came with bodyguards and bulletproof glass, it was theirs, and that was enough.